fatherhood. Aside from your son being diagnosed with autism, which is a big thing, what other surprises have you encountered in fatherhood?
I mean,
I could see why this one would take precedence.
no, it is. It's tough. Like, I don't think there's many like surprises in parenthood for me. I was like expecting a lot of the challenges. I was expecting it to be expensive. You know, we just spent another $60 on diapers today, and we go through about $40 worth of formula every 8 days, you know. So it's like I knew it was going to be expensive. I knew I wasn't going to be able to sleep. I guess I'm a little surprised with how little sleep was like I can function off of. But I think like being like an autism dad, I think one of the biggest surprises is just like how little is like known about it. Just like it really is so many unknowns. Like there's thousands of genetic conditions that are markers for autism, but there's so many other things that can cause autism that they don't really even understand. And there's so many like challenges, especially with like the nonverbal. For me, like I don't know if you saw it, but it was a valedictorian, and she was like she's nonverbal autistic, and she typed a speech because she was fortunate enough to be taught how to type. And she was just saying like, I feel trapped inside my body. And I really do feel like you have people with autism, and this is just my interpretation, okay? And like because I can't speak for autistic adults, like they have their own voice, but I feel like it's kind of being like in some ways being stuck in a dream where you're just trying to scream for help, but you can't.
Absolutely.
So while like I don't look for like a cure in the future for autism, like that's not necessary. I think the autistic mind is a gift. I hope they find solutions to open people up with autism, where someone who's like level 3 autistic and has so many daily struggles and just really is just checked into themselves, maybe they will be able to find a way for them to communicate better or be slightly more independent or just more expressive. So that's what I, truly hope for.
Let's dive into that, because I feel the same way. Like my cousin is mom to an autistic child, and she and I have discussed certain things in that vein. Again, I do a little bit of volunteer work for an organization here in Florida, and there's a reason we say neurodiverse and not handicapped or disabled these days. Like, you're neurodiverse. Like, we all have a thing, right? Whether it's neurodiverse, whether it's like we're humans. So we're all afflicted by something, and afflicted is not the right word, so forgive me.
Anxiety, depression, OCD.
Yeah, we all have something that that we carry, whatever that may be. And I don't see a neurodiverse individual as, for all intents and purposes, I'll say a crutch, like, oh, that's a bad thing. I see it as a way to view the world differently. Just like I would say somebody who's in a wheelchair, who's physically diverse, is a way to view the world in a unique fashion. So, like, let's talk about your views on that. Like, do you have an opinion?
Yeah. I mean, if someone were to ask me like what the definition of autism is, like what I see, it would just like really be like the brain just interprets the world differently. And with that, it creates a broad range of challenges and personality traits.
And who doesn't have a personality trait or a differing opinion or a different way to look at something?
Autistic people are great. I mean, like, honestly, like some things that we see as parents of a kid on the spectrum, like, we're not really too worried about our kid, like in high school, going out drinking and driving or doing drugs, because they're going to be like, no, like, I'm not old enough to drink. I'm not going to drink. Like, they're very black and white. And like, even like with my son being 3, he won't cry to get his way. He won't cry to, just, I don't know, like get one over.
Manipulate a situation.
Exactly. Manipulates the word I'm looking for. He will cry because he hurt himself. Like if he falls and is actually crying, like I know he hurt himself. but I've seen him take tumbles and everything. Like he'll just get up and run. And like, it's one thing, people on the spectrum, a lot of times you'll hear that they don't have a sense of humor because they have a hard time gauging emotion. Like with my son, he doesn't know when I'm angry at him or happy with him. He thinks like when I'm changing him and he's kicking and he actually like hits me and it hurts. And I'm telling him no, like he thinks it's like a joke, you know, because he can't read that he upset me or that he hurt me. And that can be
Mm.
tough. But like so you have that where like reading emotion, um, reading sarcasm, like it's I was talking to someone about autism who like his kid's autistic, but he was like naming he was just defining autism to the T. He was like, if you see the definition of literal in the dictionary, like it's a picture of my son. And he's just like so literal. And that's like, but he was telling me other things that we saw with our son. Like he wouldn't play with Matchbox cars. He would line them up bumper to bumper, or he would stack his balls. And like that's that visual sensory input. It's like to him, it's just visually pleasing when he sees like everything
Yeah,
in like a nice,
organized.
organized straight line,
Yeah,
like a big stack. Um,
totally. It's so fascinating how their brains work, though, you know, like it, I think it's like such an incredible thing. And I like what you said that like it's not a superpower, you know, your son doesn't want to be someone's hero. That and this is coming from someone I volunteer with the leader of the nonprofit, the CEO. Her son has Down syndrome, and she's like, he's a 13-year-old boy. He wants to be a 13-year-old boy like everybody else wants to be a 13-year-old kid, you know? Like
yeah, and guess what?
he's not here to be
happy.
your poster child, you know? And I think that's so fair and such an honest thing to say, but does also just highlight how they don't need to change. Like you said, there doesn't need to be a cure for autism. There doesn't need to be a cure for Down syndrome. These kids wouldn't be who they are if they didn't have that. And we're going to use air quotes here, diagnosis, because these things have been around for centuries before we labeled them, and people have got along fine. Now we just know what they are. So why can't we just embrace it instead of making a thing about it?
Mm-hmm.
You know what I mean?
From a
Like,
medical standpoint, like it's a disorder, but it's like it's not a learning disability. It's autism is not
right.
bad behavior. And again, it's like it's not a superpower either. It's like some people will just have like just daily struggles, and it doesn't define him. It isn't like who he is, but it definitely makes up his personality. It makes up
Yes.
who I'm in love with. And just like your friend's son who has like Down syndrome, it's like I'm sure their parents have struggles and it can be emotional. And it's like, no, it's emotional from us. So I'm just speaking from my experience. But and I look and like my kid's like happy. You know, he's happy every day. He's having a good day. Maybe he had a little meltdown. Mainly the sound right now. Like once we get past that and once we can really click on that receptive communication, which I think between age 3 and 4, he's just going to blossom. I think he's just going to be this like amazing little kid. And a lot of times, like when we're at the park, like people don't even know he's autistic or anything. They just think he's quiet. Like I've heard so many people, oh, he's so polite, you know, because he's not barreling through their kids and pushing to get like past them on the slide. He's like kind of waiting for them to move. And he's just like the sweetest little kid. And I just like look at him and I'm like, he's happy. And it's like, I walk in his room in the morning, he might not be staring right at me saying, good morning, daddy, you know, but he might be like kind of looking off to the left saying cat, cat, but then he hands me his little cat. He's obsessed with cats. But he'll hand me his like stuffed animal cat and he's happy, you know, and then he wants up and I'll pick him up. And like, that's just like how we communicate. And that's just like how our life kind of is. And again, like I can look back and see that and like, and I could feel sorry for myself, or I could just be like really fortunate to have such an like amazing kid. And like, that's where we're at. Like I really do feel fortunate to have such an amazing kid. Like he's just like pure love. I know probably so many people say that about their kids, right? But I mean, it's how I feel.
Well, he's shown you that. So I think that's telling you. If you feel that way, it's because he's shown you that. So,
oh yeah, and he might not be able to express it. Like he does repeat like, I love you so much. Like he'll repeat it. Does he mean it or not? Like probably not. Like, but I mean, I know he means it, but I don't think he understands what it means. But the other night I went to go.
Let's be real.
Yeah, I went to grab his cup out of his bed, like I always do, and I accidentally woke him up. This was a couple weeks ago, like a week or two ago. So he's all upset. He's just real upset, crying because he's awake. He wants to be asleep, and he's really half out of it to begin with.
Mm.
And you know what he's doing? He's like, "Mommy, mommy, mommy." He's like pointing to his door. He wants to go see his mommy. So it's like he definitely comes to us and finds comfort in us, and like we know he loves us, and
Yeah.
he expresses that differently, and we communicate differently, but we all understand each other. And he's very with it too. Like he pulled the nightlight out of the wall in the hallway this morning and like took it apart. Henry picked that up. Like he grabs it, picks it up, hands it to me. Like it's so interesting. It's like to me, it's still like a mystery because like he just gets so much. Like go give Sissy a kiss. He'll go give his sister a kiss on the head. You know, it's crazy. He'll drag his
So
chair over to the
sweet.
island to make a PBJ because he's telling us he's hungry. You know, but he can't like answer questions like, "Are you tired? Did you have a good day?" Like stuff like that. It's like right now, a struggle, but we're working with it. Um,
Sounds like a beautiful little struggle, though. Like, so here's a good thing. Like, what would you want other parents who don't have neurodiverse kids?
yeah, that's such
What
an
would you want
important
them to
question.
understand?
So
What would you, someone like me, what would you like, what would you want me to understand about your
so
reality?
my whole thing, like if I could coin one phrase, it would just be like encourage inclusion. Just like please
Mm.
encourage your kids to be inclusive. And so like let me kind of break down what the word autism is. So like in its realest form, like the word aut comes from the Greek word autos, which means self. And ism is
Mm-hmm.
like the state of being. So autism means like this in its truest form, the state of being oneself. But the word autism came from a
Mm.
psychiatrist in the early 1900s, and he used it to describe what he saw as withdrawing into oneself's own world. And like that's kind of goes on what
Interesting.
I was saying with like the nonverbal. It's like it's really lonely. I think autism is very lonely. I think that in some ways they're trapped inside their own self, and because of that, I mean, it's like maybe anybody knows, or I would assume that like people understand that autism has many social challenges, and because of that, like I know my son's
Mm-hmm.
going to struggle to have friends. He'd rather play with himself than play with other people. Sometimes he'd rather just be alone, and that is really hard to see as a parent because at the same time like he
Definitely.
wants friends, he wants to have fun. He's actually very good with like
Yeah.
task based um, play. Like let's do a puzzle. Like we'll do a puzzle together with someone, but he's not going to just randomly play with toys. He was with my nephew, my sister's kid, and they were like taking fish out of the water table and putting it in the net, and he loved that because he could count. He was doing something. It was like very task based, and like they just like he plays differently. He's just a little different, and I would hope that parents of just really anyone would just like really encourage inclusion and challenge your kids because I know for
Mm.
me, I had great parents. If you went to my parents behind my back and said like, "Does your kid include everybody?" and they're like, "Yes, he does," you know, they'd be like, "Yes, he does. He's so inclusive. He accepts everyone." Like, yeah, I did. Like, I didn't judge people, but I didn't go out of my way because I was never challenged to go be friends with that person who's sitting
Mm-hmm.
at the lunch table by themselves, or the person that everyone's making fun of because they have a wild
Mm-hmm.
obsession with Star Wars and that's all that they talk about, or all they want to do is draw dinosaurs and tell you all about dinosaurs, or just maybe even the kid who's nonverbal and like quote unquote like the weird kid. Like it broke my heart. Like um I was with someone who had kids and we were at a park, and I guess he was about 6 or 7 at the time, and he was like, great kid with great parents, but he was like, that's like, he's weird. This kid was like talking to me. He was like obviously autistic because all he wanted to show, he just wanted a seesaw. So he just wants someone to play seesaw with him. So I'm playing with him and he's like showing me his shirt. He's like, you see what's on my shirt? It's like, what, like a penguin or something or whatever. It was a little logo, he's
Mm-hmm.
like talking about what he's interested in. And like, but to someone his age, like his peers, like he's weird. And like, if it wasn't such a, like so politically incorrect, like for lack of better words, just like tell your kids to like embrace the weird kid, like encourage inclusion,
Mm-hmm.
challenge your kids. If you can, if you can just like
Amen.
instead of saying like, how was your day or what did you learn, you say, did you meet anybody new? Like, why not? Is there someone that looks like they could use a friend? Because like, if my son
Yes.
could just have like one or two people going through school with him that could understand, like my wife and I do, that he needs a little bit of time away, or he needs some quiet, or just he needs someone to help him self regulate, like that just makes the world of a difference. And, like, I hope in some ways, like my daughter is neurotypical, so she can be that for him. But if she's autistic, that's okay too. And she'll still be there for him.
Right.
But again, like it kind of comes down to worrying about the future and worrying about his independence. Like he doesn't need a lot of friends. He just needs a couple really good ones. So like I really challenge like
Mm-hmm.
anybody who's listening just to push your kids to make friends with the weird kid. Because I can definitely say I would have done things a lot differently. And they're like through middle school, high school, and college. Like I think we all can name one or two people who like, damn, like
Amen.
he was autistic, and damn, I wish I stood up for him, and I wish I wasn't silent. And it just like it breaks my heart.
I think too, though, it was so different when we were like in elementary and middle school. Like in the last, I will say 20 years since we kind of like were in high school and college. Like I remember going to elementary school and, the special education students like rode a different, literally rode the short bus, and you could say that but it was a fact. Like it's not like a demeaning thing. Like they literally rode a separate bus and it was shorter than the regular
There's less
school bus.
people in the schools providing transportation, so they throw them on the short bus, and now that's like a dig.
And they, yeah, and it was segregated. So if you were even if you were like neurotypical but physically diverse, like you rode the short bus, like you were separate. Even if you had the same mental capabilities as like a quote unquote normal kid, because I don't even know what normal is, so I'm going to put that in quotes there. You 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 rode a different bus and you went to a different part of the school and you never were integrated. And
That's a problem.
while I understand that it's difficult for teachers to have all these different layers of abilities, I get that. I also understand that there are some students who should at least be included in certain classroom activities or subjects because it's their specialty. So funny enough, it's not funny, but I interviewed this woman for a story, and her daughter was, I forget exactly what she has, but anyway, she looks physically typical. She looks, there's no telling signs, but she's mentally behind. And eventually she'll have like lesions that grow, and her skull will kind of like impede her brain, essentially, is like what happens. And I can't remember what this is called, but the point is she's neurodiverse and doesn't have the same capacity as a neurotypical person, but she also has like brilliance. So like she's really good with like art and science. So you could put her in any science class, you could put her in any art class, and she's going to excel. Like she's like a Van Gogh. She's like, what's that? Galileo. She's like she could do all the things that are hard. She's like 12, but she has no social, like she doesn't understand social situations and other things, like communicative. So like English, math, she just breaks down. Like her brain is really good in certain capacities, really bad in others. And that's just how she's going to be for the rest of her life. And eventually her exterior will match where her brain capacity is. And I got to look it up because it's in a story somewhere. But anyway, and she was telling me like this girl's experience in school and what she goes through and how she's manipulated by her peers and how she had to change schools because of this manipulation. Like some kid, like in aftercare, like talk to her into taking her clothes off kind of thing. Like that's like, she doesn't understand that that's not acceptable. And these boys took advantage of her. And luckily a teacher walked in. And however, so when she goes to a new school who kind of understands her disability and how her brain works, she started thriving. She
Beautiful.
was excelling in, all subjects, but she was only like mainstreamed for the ones in which she was like really exceptional at. So she had that, peer camaraderie, and she had found friends in these classrooms because she could relate to them. But in the subjects where she struggled and like wasn't there developmentally, she was in a different classroom with people who were more like, I guess her ability level. And, but it was a beautiful combination, mind you, this was a private school. So her parents were paying like 25 grand a year to send her there, that kind of crap. But it was one of those things where you're like, wow. And then I don't know about Pennsylvania or Maryland, but in Florida, I've read and have heard horror stories about, kids who are differently abled and they have been restrained, and that causes PTSD and a whole other slew of things that like a neurotypical parent or a physically typical parent doesn't have to worry about. I don't have to worry about my son being tied down because he's overloaded and no one knows how to communicate with him or put him in a safe space like your tent, and those are the things I think we need to highlight. Like, we all have emotions. Some of us can regulate them. I think some adults could use some help in regulating their emotions, right? But now we're expecting our kids and our neurodiverse kids to assimilate to a neurotypical culture, and we're not preparing our teachers for it. We're not preparing like our students for it. We're not preparing staff for it. We're not even educating ourselves as parents. And I get it. Like, we have a lot going on, but I also feel like a little bit of kindness goes a long way. So if you can just, that was a really long-winded tangent.
It's a nice monologue.
Kind of like,
I like that. Are there a lot of like down your way, like a lot of signs like be kind? I see that in PA all the time. It's like people having their on shirts, people having their yards, like signs that say like be kind. Like that is big up here.
I don't know if I see that, but that's always been a big thing for me. Like, I have a shirt that says raise kind to humans, and that's kind of like my MO. Like, what's that motto? Be the change you want to see in the world, blah, blah. Like, you got to raise it too, I think it's really important to practice what we preach with our kids. And I think it's really important to, I ask Declan every day, what do you choose to be today? How are you going to emulate who you are, right? Most of the time, he says kind or helpful. Other times, he'll say something like, happy or whatever, but usually it's kind. And when it is kind of like a mantra, like when you get off task, because here's the thing, regardless of who he is and regardless of who he meets, he has a choice to be something. So if you ever get off kilter, and let me tell you what, it's worked for me, because there's definitely days where I'm like, argh! And I'm like, no, I said I'd have patience. I said I would have patience. I said I would have patience, Well, my whole reason for doing that is like, he's going to meet people who are going to try to pigeonhole him, who are going to demean him, who are going to bully him, whoever he is, just kind of referring back to the earlier conversation. And he has to choose how he responds and the kind of person he wants to be. So my whole thing, and you can like see my book in the background, like my whole thing is, how do you want to be? Who are you going to be to the kids who are different in a wheelchair, who look different, who are ethnically diverse, who are neurodiverse? Like, remember, if you're wearing a dress and you're technically a boy who identifies differently, you want to be accepted. So you better, and I don't mean to sound like authoritatively, but like just remember that everybody wants to be accepted. So are you doing your part? It's kind of like my motto as a parent.
Such a good motto.
You know, like that was a long-winded.
I need to pick up some
monologue.
of your book. I was keeping it on Amazon. It's like your book's definitely a little too much for Henry right now because it's like it's definitely not a kid's picture book. But I think I need to pick it up for my nieces and nephews who are, elementary school age. I think it's a really good book. I'm going to order a few copies. Like
it's good for emotional intelligence, honestly. Like it's about like 10-year-olds who have to like mind over matter, and I think that's a good lesson for any kid.
I love that. We'll keep that up. But yeah, with the schools, like how you were saying, like I mean, everything we're doing now with all the different early intervention specialists he sees and everything else he's in, it's like we're just trying to set him up to mainstream through school, and like that is like our end goal. Now that he's 3, he transitions from infants and toddlers program, which was like age 1 to 3, and now he's into like 3 plus, which is like more of like a structured learning classroom setting that he's going to start doing in August. It's twice a week, but reading through like their evaluations, like 50 pages. I read every single page, and it was like one thing I've recommended. It was like do things with your kid with just neurotypical kids, because like they don't do that, and like that kind of worried me when I read that. I'm like, so like you aren't gonna, is it just this like pre-K kind of thing he's in right now with the early intervention? Because I get it, it's only like 6 hours a week, or is it like, what's that going to look like when he's in actual pre-K and actual kindergarten? Like, is he going to be able to be integrated with like the general population and mainstream him with like, he's excellent at art. Like my wife's an artist, he loves art, and like, is he going to be doing art with like just all the special education kids because that's where he's stuck, or can he go try to like learn social skills? And like that's what we're hoping for. And it does concern me that like where we moved, I told you we moved recently, like we picked like we had 2 towns that we would live in because of the school system, and like we are in a great school system right now, but I still just like worry, it's like, will they be able to integrate him with neurotypical kids? Because there's
that's
like
a good question to ask now. They got to find that out now. Like, I mean,
I just feel like the schools
it's
maybe
so
aren't
difficult.
doing like enough, and like you said, like I don't feel like maybe parents in the school are doing enough to like have people be more accepting of kids with differences.
I think it's so. This is such a God. We could spend a whole podcast just talking about this. Like, it's so hard because teachers are so overwhelmed and they don't have the training, and the training they get isn't sufficient. It's just not. Like, I have a few friends who are teachers. One of my friends is a teacher in Dallas, and she's like, she's taking an office job because it's easier and it's less paperwork and it's more money. And it's sad because she's a great teacher. And no, don't get me wrong. What she's doing is great for her career. She's a reading specialist, blah, blah, like it's awesome. But it's equally, it's like, there's not enough resources. There's 2 things I would pay more taxes for. It's our education system, 100%, and our veterans. 100%. Like you can tax me 50% if our teachers are going to have training, if our veterans are going to be looked after, if they're going to have mental health care, if our teachers are going to have access to actual training that will make them better at their job and dealing with all the spectrum of kids that they have to, or what we're throwing at them, or so that we don't have to spend $800 on school supplies. Tax me. Great. That's fine. But don't screw our kids up. Don't pay them $25,000 a year. They're worth more than that. And our veterans are a different topic, but you just took bullets for our country, and now you're living on the street because you have PTSD and no one wants to look after you, and you got hooked on meth because you were dealing with your war issues. That should not be a thing. Anyway, that's my TED Talk. Let's step back down.
No, you're right. That could be a whole other podcast.
Yeah. It's just like, to me, I'm like, I don't understand. Anyway,
Well, I'm glad you
back
have
to
those
you.
views. You're a good person, Bree.
Well, it depends on the day, but thank you. I appreciate that.
Get you an office down in Florida. Get that freaking crazy guy out there.
I don't think they could handle me. I would be too new, like purple. Like I'm just enough red and just enough blue. They couldn't handle me. Like they would be like,
I'm the
"What?
same
What's wrong
way.
with
Like,
this
why can't
girl?"
we just kind of have some like common sense? Like, if this country's really free, just like, and we shouldn't go off on this tangent, but like, if this country's free, and like, I believe in God and I'm a Christian, but like, I don't believe a free country should be based off of any kind of religious views. Like, I'm sorry, but still, I don't know. I'll probably like get your
Like,
podcast, like people like giving you shit reviews now because I said it, but I
that's
don't know.
fine. No, no, no. That's your opinion, and I appreciate it. Like
Yeah.
that's what this whole podcast is about. Is everybody has a different opinion, and I have my own opinion, and it's very neutral. It is very, dare I say, libertarian? Like, because that's kind of what
Yeah,
I
there's
am.
nothing
I'm
wrong with
like,
that.
let's do it.
All
I'm
freedoms all the
very.
time. If it was up to my son, they would just like we'd all be ruled by cats. Honestly, just like, fuck the cats.
I mean, they're so cuddly. um, what insight do you wish you would have known before becoming a dad? I think this is such a good question just for every parent. Like, what do you wish you would have known before Hendrik was here or Charlotte was around?
Um, Again, that's kind of like a hard one because I took on parenting um as like I'm just gonna be kind of go with the flow and be self-taught. I know I'm gonna care for these kids. I know I'm
Mm,
gonna do a good job. I know I'm gonna do everything in their best interest. So I don't know if there's That's really hard to say. Whatever the answer is probably something that I don't know that I should know. You know what I mean? But like even my sister, who's like one of my best friends, like she gave me that big thick book. I forget what it's called, the A to Z to
right.
parenting. It's the blue one, right? That just sat there. But she even said, like, someone gave this to me. I'm gonna give it to you. Don't read it. Just do your own thing. Like that was probably the best advice I could get. Like take everything with a grain of salt. Um, if
Mm,
you could say like what kind of insight I could share to parents on this like of children on the spectrum. Like I've got a
mm-hmm.
list of it. Like for one, like I said, we first kind of had an idea that if first someone was like, "Hey, your son might be on the autism spectrum," was when he was 18 months. It took until January of this year to get a formal diagnosis. So my
Oh, wow.
first piece of advice would be get on wait lists. Get on as many wait lists as you can, even if you don't think you need them. Like I told you, we don't know if our daughter is gonna develop autism or not. She's on a wait list to be evaluated for it because we know that probably won't be until she's 18 months. So why wait until she's
Mm-hmm.
18 months old to get her on that list? And now we're another 6 to 12 months out. Like get on those wait lists. Um, Start talking to the early intervention just by going googling through your public school. It's federally funded and federally
Mm.
required that all public schools need to have early intervention from infants and toddlers, which is 0, 1, and 2, and then the other program that Henry's about to go into, which is like 3 and up. So get the early intervention. That all happens quick. The early intervention you can get started within like a month. Like they'll go through the assessment process, the evaluation rather,
Mm-hmm.
determine that you're eligible, and then they will start services. You can get OT, behavioral therapy, you can get PT, you can get speech therapy,
Oh,
all at no
wow.
charge, typically in your house. Um, in some school boards, some school systems, like when I was in Maryland with Anne Arundel County, we started doing that structured learning in a classroom environment, which is what he's going to be getting now at 3. So get on the wait list, start your early intervention, and then there's something called ABA, which is therapy for
Mm-hmm.
autism. You actually can't have ABA unless you're autistic. So find out if you suspect your kids on the spectrum, find out what businesses in your area do ABA and ask them for a list of psychiatrists that do diagnosis. Because if you get on like a big list like Children's Hospital or like in Maryland, you've got like Kennedy Krieger or Hopkins up in PA, we're at Geisinger. You're going to be waiting 6 to 12
Mm-hmm.
months, and a lot of it could be out of pocket, which is very expensive. So, like, I went to a place called Mission Autism, and I said, "Give me a
Mm-hmm.
list of all the psychiatrists that can evaluate my son." I was on a time crunch. we just had a kid, well, Charlie, she just last year she was born. So we're blowing through all of our deductible money. And I wanted to find a psychiatrist
Mm-hmm.
that is on our healthcare network and we had good health insurance. So I called around, I called every single
Right.
one on the list, and I found one that could get the diagnosis, at least the testing done by the end of last year, December. We started end of November, finished in December because it's a process. You don't just evaluate someone off of a 1 hour phone call. It's a process, and there's a lot of
Yeah.
questionnaires, a lot of repetition in the questions. They ask the same question 10 times. They want consistency.
Right.
They want to run it through the algorithm. So to find a
Hmm.
psychiatrist that takes your health insurance is huge. I wish someone told me that earlier. Like, fortunately, I found one on my own. Um, and we were getting those what are EOBs, like explanation of benefits, whatever, from the
Yeah.
health insurance companies, and it was
Yeah.
like 1250,
Exactly.
1950, like it just kept coming. Like, I felt like every
So
single week
expensive.
there was like a new bill, but it was all you owe $0, because it was covered. So like that diagnosis probably would have cost us 4 or 5 thousand bucks, but it was completely covered because we used our entire deductible, and we found someone who could bill the health insurance instead of billing us. So that's huge. Then in some
Mm-hmm.
states like Pennsylvania, I had someone tell me this, and I'm really glad that they did, was that in PA you can have Medicaid for certain. Okay, ASD. So what's autism spectrum? The D is a disorder. Like, medically, it is a disorder. Okay. So like if you have
Mm-hmm.
certain disorders, you can be eligible for non-income driven Medicaid. It doesn't matter how much you make, you can
Mm.
have Medicaid. And it's something I got the paperwork for. I actually, through everything else going on with the move, like I never finished up the Medicaid, but we have great health insurance. Medicaid, if you can get Medicaid, will cover the copays. So if you are putting your kid in ABA therapy, which is 5 days a week for a few hours a day, you could have
Mm-hmm.
daily copays of $20, $50, $100, whatever your copay is. The Medicaid will pay those copays. So you've got your normal health insurance paying what they pay, and then the Medicaid can pay your copays. Like, that's huge. If $20 a copay 5 days a week, that's $100. Like, that's a lot of money. So like, look into
Mm-hmm.
the income driven Medicaid if that applies in your state, and then also through like support like mom and dad Facebook groups. Like, I'm in two autism dad groups, and it's nice. Like, I definitely don't get out there and vent a lot. We're friends, so I'm sure you don't see me to begin with, like on Facebook, just sharing a lot of personal stuff. I'm just a little more,
Mm-mm.
I guess, like close up on that. But like this dad group, it's like raw and real. It's things you definitely can't say to anyone else. And like, it's just like real raw emotion, whether it's relationship
Mm-hmm.
issues, having problems
Yes.
with patience with your children. And like, I get a lot of like a value of being in that group, and just like not seeing people's struggles, but understanding how different people's outlooks on those struggles are, and the positive outlooks, and how people cope with that. So like, definitely the mom and dad groups. And it's funny too, because like I'll tell Shelby like, oh yeah, like this dad in this group was like complaining about that today actually, and she'll be like, man, I'm gonna join this dad group. Like, I should just be in the dad group. Like, the mom group's like so much more tame, and they're so much more judgmental. So like, yeah, like
Ain't that the truth?
it's like any mom group. Jesus, she was in like Annapolis Moms, and that was just like ridiculous. But I don't know. But who am I to
I can't
judge? Like, I
imagine.
shouldn't.
Yeah, I just there's just certain areas like, and I see it here in Florida too. You're just like, some of them are very like, wow, soul bearing, and others you're just like, why am I even part of this? This is not helpful at all. You're all either just pretending, or it's either like one side of the spectrum, like nobody has it worse than I do, or everything is like punk, peachy keen. And it's like, oh, come on, people, like get over
Yeah, for
yourselves.
me, it's
That's all
when
I
someone
feel.
like invalidates something where it's like every kid has needs.
Yes,
That drives me nuts.
duh.
Right.
Like stop.
Yeah,
Okay.
so it's like my kid does have like he does have special needs. Like, okay, I get that your kid's a picky eater and maybe he'll only eat McDonald's nuggets too, but like, did your kid refuse to eat because it wasn't on the blue plate that he needs to eat? Like, luckily we're at the point where he can eat food off of like three or four different plates without just pushing it away and saying all done, and like for me, and people are like, oh, well, if he doesn't eat, he doesn't eat. Well, it's like, no, if he doesn't eat, he's going to have a meltdown because he can't self-regulate and he's grumpy.
Yeah. He's hangry. Like, who doesn't get upset when they're hangry?
Yeah, I know I do.
Yeah, I do too. My mom will like come home from tennis, and my husband's like, "You're kind of like, I need you to eat. Leave me alone." Like, stop.
Yeah, even if you tell him no, he better start cooking something.
Jimmy, is there anything else we've missed that you wanted to share that we haven't covered?
One thing that you did discuss in an email when we were like talking about different questions, you were talking about like misconceptions of autism. So like one thing that I do want to address is that, like, for one, there's no such thing as low functioning and high functioning autism. Okay, like those are out of date terms. Even Asperger's an out of date term. So like, that can be really hurtful to say like low functioning, someone's low functioning autistic or high functioning autistic, because it puts a limit to their potential. And I don't care if you're nonverbal or if you have mild autism, like your potential is limitless, and no one's to say like where you will be. So like just those terms is like one thing. Like, so like what's acceptable and actually what it is now is there's 3 levels of autism. So there's level 1, there's level 2, and there's level 3. So level 3 is what we think of like being the most severe, requires like substantial support and really can't live independently. Really like what I hit on, where you're just like inside your own world.
Yeah.
You can't really communicate. You just have great difficulties communicating, understanding what's going on, changing of tasks, and just being able to perform certain tasks. Like that's level 3. Level 2 is kind of where we're at now, especially with like his poor receptive communication skills and not being able to like answer basic questions, or being able to like, Henry, stop, there's a car coming, like being able to like understand stuff like that. Like we're like, I think level 2 right now, where we can get down to level 1. So like level 2 is you know, it still requires like substantial support, but while there's social challenges, there's probably like less challenges with communications. He can still function somewhat independently. He still wants to brush his hair. He still wants to try to make his food, brush his teeth.
There's room for intervention, kind of thing, and like progress.
Yeah, absolutely. But even with like level 1, like it still requires support. So like if you think like your son is mildly, or daughter, or your child, or even what you find out is like there's adults that are getting diagnosed and they're like, wow, okay, like that makes sense. It's becoming more and more common. So you see like level 1 autistic, where like you have social challenges. So like that's what I really want to point out, because like when people, and I can't remember what I thought a year and a half ago, but like when you think about the spectrum, this is how I pictured the spectrum: very linear. Little autistic, very autistic, nonverbal, quirky, and like the spectrum is not linear. Like go on Google Images and type in autism spectrum, and you will see just like a beautiful circle of like different gradient colors that kind of blend together. It's just a giant like color wheel, and you'll have like on this pie chart of the spectrum, you'll have sensory input. So like, where's my kid going to fall in sensory input? Does he have physical sensitivities? Does he have emotional sensitivities? And the next part of the pie is communication. Communication isn't just language, it's nonverbal communication. Like, my God, I know that more than anyone, because through all his speech therapy over the past year and a half, we never work on words. Like, we never work on speech. It's all nonverbal communication and engagement, getting him to engage for a long period of time. So he has the IEP now. That's one of the goals, one of his 3 goals in this IEP for age 3 is like being able to just engage for a period of 5 minutes, 50% of the time. Like, that's one of the goals on his IEP to get there. Obviously neurological on the spectrum. Do you have someone who stims a lot? Like Henry likes a lot of sensory input. So like, he loves jumping. He loves to spin. He used to rock and hit his head back. So you see a lot of like hand flapping, or just like physical stimming. Or you might have verbal stimming, where you hear someone repeating the same thing over and over and over again. Like, with Henry kind of does that. He makes like cat noises and dog noises, but that's also kind of how he plays. And then there's other things
Mm-hmm.
like spatial awareness, routines, transitioning can be a huge struggle. And again, that kind of
Mm-hmm.
goes to like how we like just kind of plan like everything we do based around autism. Like I know my one buddy was like one of the first people I reached out to. Has a daughter on the spectrum. I never would have known just by seeing pictures and all, but like she's a very sweet girl. You know, they take her to the aquarium when you go from like the sharks to the fish. Like she just wants to be with the sharks. And like I know other kids might have meltdowns when it's like time to stop. Like it really is different and it's hard to explain, but like major sensory meltdowns, major issues. I mean, geez, we took Henry to the zoo when he was like a year and a half. He didn't see one animal like breathe. There was an elephant right in front of him. There were like giraffes. Like he didn't. He was so distracted by everything else going on. He had a great time. He had a great day. He didn't see one animal. Like no lie. There was like a lion
Oh,
walking around in front
wow.
of him, like he didn't see one animal. And that's tough as a parent,
I never get to see the lions.
just walking tiger right in front of him.
And you didn't,
But I think
yeah.
like right now, if we took him back, like he would be like, you know, tiger, penguin, elephant. Like he would too, and especially if he saw
See it
an
now.
animal that he didn't know, and I told him what it was, he'd be saying it like all the time. So it's just like such an interesting thing how the autistic mind works, and I really like. Again, I'm like no expert because like I'm learning about my son every single day, and like I'm learning more about
Yeah.
autism every single day through him, and there's just so much that is like still a mystery. And if you interviewed like someone else from my dad group or you interviewed my wife, like you're definitely going to get a completely different perspective. And I just like also want to say like I fully understand that like our challenges are way different than others, especially people who are level
Mm.
3, and I don't take that like for granted. I do feel really fortunate um, that like I have a son who's like has a range of emotion, who can smile, who can
Mm.
laugh, who can joke, who's silly, who has like just interests. You know, he's just this beautiful, bright little kid, and I'm like really fortunate for that.
Well, I also think it's so important to highlight that, like, you're aware, you're aware of his opportunities and that he can get better. Not that he needs to be like fixed or, you know, cured by any means, but he can get through some difficult things about his diagnosis and have a full and prosperous
Mm-hmm.
life. You know what I mean? Like, I think that's really important to highlight. Like, there's so many parents. Like, I'm going to go back to what you said about like Googling the spectrum, because what we forget and what people don't know about the spectrum is things like ADD, ADHD, OCD. Those are all spectrum disorders. If you get down
Absolutely.
into it, those are all spectrum disorders. How many people do you know with ADD, ADHD, or OCD? I have OCD, but like nobody told us that 20, 15 years ago, 10 years ago, probably even 5 years ago. I think this is like all newer. So I don't, I'm 30, I'll be 37 this year. So like whatever with me, but I think that it's so important as a parent. Like, here's another thing I read the other day that kind of highlights this. It's like, oh, I did that with my kids and I turned out fine, or they turned out fine, or I gave my kids this and they turned out fine. It's like, well, just because you use, Tropicana orange juice with all the sugar in it, or just because you use like banana boat sunscreen with all the crap in it, doesn't mean that we should continue doing it, because you know what? Maybe we're not okay because of it. Maybe we are overly anxious. Maybe we are overly depressed. Maybe we developed certain things because of the crap that we were, told to tolerate as children. This is just me on my soapbox again. So I think it's so encouraging that our generation as parents is like, oh, hey, something's not right here. This doesn't feel right. This doesn't look right. This doesn't seem, bell curve, like even in the bell curve. Again, I'm going back to this. Even in that top nook, forget the outliers. Even at that top nook of that bell curve, there is differentiation. There is diversity. So I think it's so encouraging that our generation as parents is like, no one looked at that bell curve at that top part, and no one really gave a fuck about the outliers. That's our job to fix that. I think that is encouraging to say we see an opportunity to do better for our kids, whatever it is, whether it's goddamn orange juice that has too much sugar and additives, whether it's milk that has plastics floating in it, or whether it's banana boat freaking sunscreen that has so much chemicals in it that you might as well get sunburnt. Like, that is encouraging to me. So the fact that you and your wife paid attention and you're like, let's see what we can do to, I don't want to say mainstream him because that's not fair, but to give him tools to be as successful as possible. I think that's a better way of looking at it, because we don't want to change any neurodiversity, unless it's really detrimental to the individual and they do need some kind of recovery. Okay, I get that. But you're just taking what he was born with and giving him tools to be successful, whatever that looks like. That is encouraging to me. It's like changing the goddamn sunscreen. I don't buy banana boat sunscreen. I don't buy fucking Tropicana orange juice.
I do kind of wonder.
I don't give my kid.
I wonder about like the plastics and the food additives and preservatives and all that crap. That's another podcast. Probably someone who's a lot smarter than me to talk about that. But you obviously you wonder.
I'll just start forwarding you all the articles I read.
So what to say too is like get a second opinion, because like especially and you were also talking about like how I think it was your nephew who like didn't grow up with like a lot of people and he was speech delayed. Well, like Henry was a COVID kid. You know what I mean? He went through that whole COVID thing when he was like a functioning toddler. Not which by function, I mean like 9 months plus, right? Because let's face it, anything under 9 months is really just like they're just like this little thing that constantly needs everything. But like there were like, so a lot of these like assessments we were doing were like virtual, and like people were like, oh, I don't see it. You know what I mean? It's like, well, literally come over, grab him by the shoulders and try to ask him, like, are you having a good day or not? And like, he will be looking through you, around you, every which way but in your eyes, because he's uncomfortable with the eye contact. So get a second opinion and don't bury your head in the sand either.
No, I think that's totally viable. And I mean, it sounds so simple, but my husband gets on me because he's always like, you don't trust doctors anyway. I was like, no, I just feel like a doctor's only as good as their experience, like, what about the doctor who told me I couldn't have kids? What about the doctor who told me that like I needed to have a C-section? What about the doctor that, what about, so it's like, if people don't hear you or see you, then they don't care about what you're saying at all. And you need to find somebody, even in like the diagnoses, you need to find a doctor that believes in the care plan, who, specialists who are encouraging and not like, oh, this is just how it is. Like, where's the optimism? Where's the opportunity for growth? We're all humans. We all have, even as adults, we have opportunity for growth. So if people are trying to stifle a 3-year-old already, well, that's a red flag. In my opinion, like, hands down across the board. If you can't see room for improvement or an opportunity to grow, as a better way of putting it, then like, that's not your doctor, in my opinion. That is not your specialist. That's not your physician. Because if you can't see the good, how can you encourage somebody to thrive?
No, you have to ask questions. You just can't take, like you said, like at the end of the day, they're just people with jobs, and they only kind of know what they know from experience and obviously continued education, but you just can't take one person's opinion. And it's, like you said, if you're not happy with your therapist, and if you don't have a therapist for your kid or even for yourself that like will just like, look out for your best interests and advocate for you. Like, we've had so many specialists that have worked with Henry that I just like truly love, because like, after seeing them for short amounts of time, they're like sad when it's his last day, and like they advocate for him to get into the best programs they can offer, and they stick to their schedule, and they're always there, and they're not making excuses. Those are people that really like stick out, and they're some of the most important people in our life. So you got to have a good team.
That. You do. it takes a village, right? And sometimes that village just looks different than we anticipate. That's for sure. Jimmy, is there anything else? Did we miss anything?
No,
I feel like we got some good
think
stuff.
that's it.
Well, I'm the mom who knows nada. My name is Brianna. This is Jimmy. He was sharing his perspective, his spectrum of dad life. Actually, thank you so much. I wish you and your family all the best, and I can't wait to catch up with you again soon. Until next time, everybody, have fun learning all the things you didn't know you needed to know.
Thanks for listening.